Hi all, I'd like to continue my coverage of Kasparov in the Tilburg 1989 tournament. In round 7 he faced Simen Agdestein, who was rated around 26.05 at the time of the game. Kasparov was 2.775. After c4, Kasparov played g6, and after knight c3, c5. So we have here White trying to play a nice positional game with the English opening. And it's interesting to see how Kasparov reacts to this setup. So White plays e3 here, perhaps with the idea of a quick d4. Kasparov plays d6. Now White plays knight ge2. So again, perhaps preparing d4. After knight f6, White castled and Black castled. Now here was a key structural point. White played d3 instead of d4, so there's a different plan now emerging for the pawn structure to keep it fluid, with the option perhaps of d4 later. Kasparov played bishop d7, and with this move the most common plan is a later a6 and b5 to try and undermine White's pawn on c4 and also gain activity on the b file. White now played h3, and Kasparov continued with this standard plan of a6, and White now plays b3, perhaps with the idea that if Black plays b5 and later bc, White can take with the b pawn. So White doesn't want to play for b4 himself, but instead prefers to wait to see what Black will do. So Black continues to play actively on the queen side now, with this b5 coming up. Now queen d2. Intriguing is the word I would use to describe Kasparov's next move. He played knight b4. So in one way he's trying to encourage White to play a3, and the knight would just return to c6, knowing that some structural damage has been done in relation to this plan of b takes c4. But there's also another point to it, that it kind of discourages White to play the move d4. Let's have a quick look. After rook fd1, rook e8, White played e4 here, but let's check d4 and to see what the purpose of the knight is in this variation. If Kasparov had taken on d4 here and then taken on c4, he would have queen c7, and it would actually be tactically possible for Black to nab the c4 pawn here, because after knight d5, all of a sudden the knight on b4 has a purpose, queen d3. Perhaps Kasparov had this variation in mind as another idea behind the knight b4. Here, according to Ribka, Black is better in all variations. For example, knight takes b4, queen takes d2, rook takes d2, rook takes b4, and Black is better. A pawn up, and White hasn't got too much compensation for that. So this knight b4's got a couple of very fine points to it. It looks a bit strange, but the position is quiet and manoeuvring in nature, so Black can afford this luxury of tempting weaknesses. White now played rook fd1, Kasparov rook e8. So after e4, Kasparov now played the knight back to c6. Because White has committed the pawn structure now, weakening the d4 square. White now played knight d5. And here, Kasparov played another very interesting move. He played e5, which in a way would seem to give White a clear plan now of playing for f4. And after king h2, Kasparov perhaps was expecting this f4 plan and wanted to discourage it a bit. So played a nice interesting move, h5, with the idea of trying to get pressure on the dark squares. After f4, first he takes on c4, and then he takes on the knight on d5, allowing queen takes d5 with seemingly a lot of pressure on his d6 pawn. However, he must have calculated very deeply here. He played simply knight d4. And what we see in the game is quite an amazing queen trap. After knight takes d4, c takes d4, white's queen is now locked in. It cannot return back to base here because of that pawn on d4. So he takes on d6, and now, instead of an immediate, say, bishop f8, or trying to defend this a6 pawn with, say, rook b6, Kasparov first plays h4, so he's trying to create more liability on this diagonal. White played now g4, and now Kasparov played simply bishop f8, offering this a6 pawn. So this queen, which can't go back to the white territory, is being tempted to just win another pawn. But the trap is now being set, because Kasparov now plays rook e6. And all of a sudden, the game has been simplified to a different game of just trapping white's queen. After queen a7, rook a8, queen b7, bishop c6 is going to win white's queen. I just want to check this game score. I believe actually whites may have resigned after rook e6. I'll leave a comment in YouTube to confirm if that was the final move or not. Let's have a look in conclusion and summary at this game. So it was a quiet English opening with the very standard plan of black playing for a6 and b5 later. White prepared for this plan with b3, trying to keep some flexibility for playing d4 later, but this flexibility was questioned with this knight b4 move, an intriguing looking move, in one way trying to provoke weaknesses with a3, but in another important for variations involving c takes d4 followed by b takes c4, where the knight is useful for the black queen, believe it or not. So it's an intriguing move which caused a commitment in pawn structure with white playing e4, slightly weakening the d4 square. So the knight returned, jubilant and causing a structural change like that. And now we see this intriguing h5 preparing for white's f4, and now a very tactical continuation with knight takes d5. In fact, if white had taken on cd, knight d4 would have been better for black, because there's still the potential now of bishop b5, and black has a very, very nice position. So in the game, the queen was trapped out of nowhere with this continuation, simplifying the game to just the queen hunt. So a very quick game win in this Tilburg tournament in round 7 for Kasparov. So he must have been pleased with this, to rest for the next day. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much, and see you on YouTube.